Hey, gang. Okay, sorry, I'm a little disheveled. Was working out a little bit and, listening to some of the SCOTUS arguments about what was going on today. And if you don't know, SCOTUS is the Supreme Court of the United States. They were hearing arguments about transgender women in sports. Yes, this has come up again. Even though, I mean, according to the NCAA, there's over 500,000 college athletes. And there's only 10 transgender athletes out of the 500,000. And even related to high school sports, I believe at this point the percentage of transgender athletes compared to cisgender athletes is transgender athletes are 0.0002% of the population of the athletic population. So I mean, this is like something that's really impacting so many people. Um, it's they and why is this such because of such low percentages, and yeah, why is it such a big deal? Well, and I probably gonna have some federal agents knocking on my door, so if I disappear, you know what happened. Um, but it's to protect women and girls, because we don't want a man in a dress, in a locker room with girls. Go back to my videos on sex versus gender. Okay, there's big differences between the two, especially gender, and it's the fact that transgender individuals, it's an identity. It's how we identify. I am a trans woman. I identify as female. If I was a man and wanted to do harm to a girl or a woman, why would I need to put on a dress to do that? Okay? How many stories have we heard, that, the middle school soccer coach, the man, is always saying things or harassing the girls, the players. Why does a guy need to put on a dress in order to do it? This whole argument, it's a man issue, not a transgender issue. And even in those videos, in the descriptions, I do have links and I discuss, some scientific research that has been done, that there are biological factors here that they've found that, geez, over 85% of the transgender people that they studied, the physiology in the brain is similar to the gender that they identify with. So there is a biological factor, but nobody cares about science. Our politicians don't care about science. I mean, come on, look at RFK. How many decades have we eradicated measles, but just in this past year, how many children have died from measles? Because the brainworm inside of his head is saying vaccines are bad. Now, if you don't want vaccines and everything, it's your choice. But the MMR has been around for, geez, 30 plus years without any issues. I mean, I had to get it when I was on the ambulance, and that was in the 80s, the MMR. So, and I mean, I'm fine, right? um, but science has nothing to do with this administration. They don't care about science. They don't care about experts in the field. They don't care about any of that. And it's just, yes, SCOTUS today was hearing arguments pertaining, and the thought is that, well, they can potentially put a nationwide ban on transgender, on trans women athletes participating in sports. So now, I mean, if you're a kid, you're a teenager and you want to be on sports, eh, why not? Why not? And part of the thing that comes up in my head, and I mean, give me feedback on this, people. Part of it that comes up in my head is, Whenever they say transgender, it's always trans women. It's always men in dresses. It's always trans women. They seem to forget that there are people that are trans men, female to male transitioned, trans men. So why is it not okay? It's not okay to have somebody with male genitalia in a women's space, but it is okay to have someone with female genitalia in a men's space. Why? Why? If you're going to talk about go both ways. Well, the NCAA, and again, I've done this in past videos, the NCAA regulations, they've updated them, and it's based on testosterone levels. But you know what? As a trans man can not only practice with teams, but participate in competitions on males' teams because of the level of testosterone. Female to male, female takes testosterone, testosterone levels go up. And the reason why that's okay is because a lot of male athletes also take testosterone supplements. You know, the thing that you see on TV with Doug Flutie and I forget the other guy, you know, that men over X amount of age, you know, your testosterone levels drop. So here, take this supplement, you know, testosterone supplement. Oh, and by the way, she'll like it too. Um, you know, so that's okay. But trans women can only practice with the women's team. They cannot participate in the competition. If it's because of testosterone levels, because of the androgen blockers, testosterone blockers that trans women take, testosterone levels drop. My testosterone levels are basically the same as a postmenopausal woman. Testosterone levels are down in the single digits. So if it's based on testosterone levels and testosterone levels drop and are basically the same as cisgender women, then why are we not allowed to? I'm going to give a couple of links in this, but actually two links. Latest study. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of studies, unfortunately, because of the politics. Because nobody wants to touch it because it's a hot potato because of the politics. That's it. Again, who cares about science? Let's deal with the politicians. Because again, the politicians say, you're a guy and you want to wear a dress, you're a freak, you're a sexual deviant. No, I'm not. Okay? But I'm going to show you one of the latest studies, actually out of England. This is from the latest study. It's from um, the British Journal of Sports Medicine. Okay, this was done last year, April of 2024. Now, this study, oh my God, and it was actually sponsored by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. And this study goes so in depth, laboratory in depth. I mean, we're talking about stuff. You know, my undergrad is in exercise physiology and exercise kinesiology, and we used to put athletes in this room. The college, we had this, you know, this thing built where we could put an athlete in there on a treadmill or on a stationary bike, clamp off his nose and only breathe through the mouth, and we could measure max VO2, you know, oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels. We can change the atmosphere. We were able to do that in this room, make it high humidity, low humidity, increase temperature, decrease temperature, all that, and see how the body reacts. You know, because when your muscles move, they produce lactic acid. They produce, when you breathe harder, which means that you push out carbon dioxide. And you have to inhale more oxygen, so you need oxygen. That's your VO2 and carbon dioxide max and all of these different things that this laboratory does, that this laboratory did with this. So here we go, making myself a little bit smaller here, and now we're going to take a look at the window. Okay, now here is the window. And this is what it is. You can actually, if you wanted to, download the PDF on this. And you can see I've already, you probably can't see it too well. Sorry. Um, but I'm going to try and make it a little bit bigger in some of this. But you can see I've already started to go through it, and I checked on some of these, and I've highlighted. I mean, here it is: strength, power, and aerobic capacity of transgender athletes, a cross-sectional study. Okay, and now again, there's what's already known about this is there is a lack of laboratory data on strength, power, VO2 max, which is your oxygen intake and oxygen utilization from transgender athlete populations. Okay. So what the study adds is that research compares laboratory measures, transgender power, max VO2 between transgender male, transgender female, and cisgender counterparts. So cisgender male and cisgender female. And Forbes actually just breaks this down as the summary, but I mean, some of the things I'm going to go through here is a conclusion that while longitudinal transitional studies of transgender athletes are urgently needed, but we know will not happen in the United States, are urgently needed, the results should caution against precautionary bans and sport eligibility exclusions that are not based on sport specific or sport relevant research. What does that mean? A swimmer is sport specific or sport relevant attributes a swimmer's body than a power lifter body. So that's sport specific, sport relevant. But of course, again, we know, and this is from the British Journal, we know that in our country, the land of the free, we are far from free. Okay. And these studies will not happen. And actually, that was one of the first things that our fearless leader did was he stopped the CDC and the NIH from doing any studies on transgender people, any transgender related studies. Immediately stopped. Immediately stopped. That was like one of the first things that he did. And I wouldn't even say within the first 100 days. That was like within the first 30 days. So, with that being said, and I'm going to try and move this over just a little bit so you could see. And again, this goes into everything from body composition, bone mass, lung function, strength, upper body power, lower body power, cardiopulmonary exercise testing, blood measurements of not just testosterone concentration, estrogen concentration, but also hemoglobin concentration. Hemoglobin, that's the red that's within our blood cells that actually takes the oxygen from the lungs, carries the oxygen to the cells to be used. So if you have a low hemoglobin, your cells are not getting enough oxygen. So it does all of this. Fat mass and free fat mass. I mean, we know that women have have a higher body fat count. That's just known, okay? And that's because of the estrogen, than men do. So it goes into the body fat, goes into lung functions, the fat-free mass, which is the fat that's just free in the body, bone mineral density, hand grip, strength. I mean, there's the research from cisgender men, cisgender women, and transgender women. I mean, look at all of these tests that they've done in a laboratory. Cardiopulmonary exercise, lower body anaerobic power. That's, anaerobic. That's the stuff that builds up lactic acid. That's the power moves. Of a power lifter, that's an anaerobic. Somebody like a long distance runner, they have to have a higher aerobic capacity. And we all know, go to aerobics class, do, jumbo, whatever it is aerobic. But when you're lifting weights, that's anaerobic. Okay. And you need more oxygen to fulfill. So part of the discussion with this is that from what they found with GAHT, which is gender affirming hormone therapy, the underscores that transgender women in the cohort of athletes, in the group of athletes that they studied, exhibit a distinct endocrine profile from cisgender men, CM is cisgender men, and share a similar endocrine profile with cisgender women. So my estrogen is the same as a cisgender woman, whom many transgender women aim to integrate into the sporting category. So this puts me on an equal level, estrogen hormonal wise, than cisgender women. So again, the only thing was one of the most notable disparities was height and mass. Okay, with cisgender men and transgender women. So yes, if you know me, you've seen me, I am taller than most cisgender women. I do have wider shoulders, so my body mass is greater, in which case a lot of people are usually, well, of course, then that means that you're going to be more powerful. And that means that you're going to trample all over all of these girls and blah, and all of that stuff. Okay, well, hold on, because body composition measures the fat mass percentage and fat free mass percentage between transgender women and cisgender women found no difference. No difference. So if we keep on going, then also looking at bone mineral density. No differences in bone mineral density were observed between transgender and cisgender women athletes in the study, despite prior research hypothesizing that transgender women athletes have a significant bone mineral density advantage over cisgender women. So previous studies said, oh, you're a transgender woman because, as growing into a male body, you have a bigger bone structure, so you have bigger bone mineral density. No, that's been proven to be false. Okay, if we keep on going, looking more into it about strength results and everything, transgender women presented lower absolute jump height than cisgender men. So when you're doing a standing jump, you just still and you stand up. That's one of the tests that we used to do in exercise physiology, which is like leg strength, and that's part of the anaerobic and the muscle types, slow twitch muscle fibers versus fast twitch muscle fibers, things like that. So again, it was, well, men being bigger and have more mass are more powerful. Oh, transgender women presented lower absolute jump height than cisgender men and lower relative jump height normalized for the fat mass than transgender men and cisgender women. So because of the fat, because they took into account while they were doing this, okay, yes, you have more body, more mass, but how much of that mass is now fat, the fat free, the body index. So they took into account these calculations, which then brings to transgender women's higher absolute peak power than cisgender women, coupled with higher fat mass, potentially driven by higher estradiol concentrations, suggests that transgender women had more inertia to overcome. So you could say, well, I have more mass, so my muscles are bigger, so I can jump higher than cisgender women. But because of the fat concentration, the fat mass, and because of the higher estrogen concentrations, I now have more inertia in my body. This is now physics bringing into this, that I have to overcome to get up during that explosive phase of the counter movement, which may lead to decreased performance. When normalized for fat-free mass, transgender women's peak power was lower than that of cisgender women, showing that this cohort, that group, also lacks peak power relativity. Okay, so similar to cisgender women. And again, now lung function, some of the conclusions. Transgender women have decreased lung function, which increases my work. I have to breathe more because my lung functions are down. Regardless of fat-free mass distribution, transgender women performed worse on the counter movement job than cisgender women and cisgender men, even though they have a comparable absolute VO2 max values than to cisgender women. When normalized for body weight, when taking into account the weight, the mass, the fat, the free fat percentage, that now my body is carrying because of the estrogen, transgender women's cardiovascular fitness is lower than cisgender men and women, cisgender women. So the research shows potential complexity for transgender athlete physiology, but long-term longitudinal studies are needed to confirm that, which again, we know will not happen in the United States. So, like I said, Forbes does break it down. This, which again, that's what this is, and I will put down the links to not just the study itself, but also this Forbes article. And they say that, transgender athletes could be at a physical disadvantage compared to cisgender counterparts, challenging claims that serve to exclude transgender athletes from participating in sports spaces. And basically, the findings: trans women performed worse than cisgender women in tests measuring lower body strength. That was the jump height. Transgender women performed worse than cisgender women, measuring lung function. We had a higher percentage of fat mass and lower fat free mass and weaker hand grip strength compared to cisgender men. The bone density was found to be equivalent to that of cisgender women, which is linked to muscle strength. So the bone density which is linked to muscle strength, I'm the same as a cisgender woman. And there were no meaningful differences found between two groups of the hemoglobin profiles, which plays a crucial role in athletic performance by facilitating oxygen delivery to the muscles. So, there's all of this stuff. And what does a lot of this stuff really come down to? Because if you're listening to the SCOTUS, the arguments that they heard, it started to bring up not just the trans athletes, the ban on transgender athletes, but it also brought up Title VII. So there's a potential impact. So if SCOTUS rules that trans women cannot compete in women's sports, that they make a nationwide ban. So high school level, college level, they cannot compete in women's sports. That now starts to impact discrimination claims. And where does discrimination come into play, which is Title VII of, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which Title VII is discrimination and harassment within the workplace. So the impact that this has can potentially impact workers' rights, transgender workers' rights in the workplace. And this is what leads to, and there are some states that have already started to move towards erasure laws. And erasure law is if I'm in a workplace and I'm being discriminated against or harassed, either verbally or physically harassed, an erasure law says that I have no right to retaliate. I have no right to file any claim. And we've also seen, as I've said in some other videos, that the EEOC, the employment, that's again under this administration, the EEOC has already dropped discrimination cases. That was the purpose of the EEOC when it was first made, is to investigate discrimination, workforce discrimination, that there have already been discrimination, even though the Bostock law, put in play, the anti-discrimination, discrimination against transgender individuals, sexual identity, not sexual, gender identity, gender orientation, that's all included as sex within a protected group of Title VII of workplace discrimination. This now, if this ban does go through, this can now, and racial laws can now do away with that. That's the potential. This is a slippery slope. And this is something that everybody needs to, because, what is that? Remember that poem that somebody wrote, at first they came for the Christians. I wasn't Christian, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the Jews. I wasn't a Jew. Then I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't do anything. Then they came for, this next group, and I'm not them, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for me, and nobody was there to speak up for me, you know? Or if they take me in the morning, they very easily could take you at night, just because they don't like you for whatever reason. Here are scientific studies being done. Who cares about the science? I don't care. We just don't like you. I don't care. The 0.002% that's being pushed down. You need to speak up. You need to say things, because you know what? Somebody can very easily look at you and say, I don't like you. And now the whole thing starts all over again, and you're part of the slippery slope. You're going down that. So if you're an ally, even if you're even if you say, I don't care, I don't know anybody that's transgender, so it doesn't matter to me, you're not in my life, you have no impact on my life, I don't care about it. Care about it, because you may be next. That's it. We need to push on this. Contact your congressman, contact your senator, contact anybody that you can, and everybody, and even in your local civic associations. If people start saying, we don't want transgender in our sports, especially Nassau County, we don't want that, say stop. There are studies that say that there's no impact. These scientific studies, professional people that do this. Stop. Say something. Because again, you could be next. We have to live life gloriously, because up until the last minute, the future's ours to make. So let's make a future that's a positive future for everybody, for every human being. That's all that it is. A future that's positive for every human being. And stop the insanity, stop the stupidity that's going on with this whole thing. So, with that being said, hope you had a great weekend. Welcome to 2026. Happy New Year. Bye.